So tonight, what I thought we would talk about is relationships with our aging parents or in-laws. And I would even include others who have other loved ones who have declining health, because the same issues pop up. And many of these issues honestly pop up in all relationships. So I feel a little funny saying, oh, it's just this area, because it actually applies to all relationships. And many of the things I talk about apply to marriages and apply to parenting also. But I did want to sort of focus this conversation on those of us taking care of aging parents. And I am, in fact, I'm not really taking care of my aging parents. And in fact, that's something I will talk about, because they don't want taken care of, they want to take care of themselves. But my mom is having a number of health issues and actually was in the ER last night and spent the night in the hospital. So it's perfect fodder for this. And last week when I did this session, I talked about my phone call, as it was like my check-in phone call, and how I applied all these coaching tools to the check-in phone call. So it's fascinating that now, a week later, I have another opportunity to apply ER visits and hospital stays to the conversation. She is home and I don't actually know if she's doing well. That will be part of but she says she's doing fine. She wants to be doing well. So for those of you who don't know me, there's a couple of you I don't know. I am Jessie Mahoney, and I'm a pediatrician, but what I do full-time now is physician coaching, and actually also not physician coaching, but 99% physician coaching. I also lead retreats and I teach yoga. And I came into this work because I worked in physician wellness at Kaiser, or TPMG is the physician arm, for almost 20 years. And when I discovered coaching for myself, I was said, wow, this is the thing that all the doctors need to figure out how to move through this work, which is so hard, in a way that's better for them. Not because the system isn't broken and not because it's our responsibility, but because it helps us move through and more sustainably, and we get to enjoy it more. And I also firmly believe that when we are healthy and well and not in our victim mentality, we will bring the solutions to medicine. And we are the ones who are ripe, who understand it and know how to make the changes. And so when we work when we work together on your mindset as physicians, it actually helps you get back to enjoying what you like to do. And if you want to work on fixing the system, great. And if you don't, that's great. And some people end up leaving and some people end up staying and loving their job. And so everyone has sort of a different outcome. And one of the reasons that this topic has come to mind is, one, my own experience. Two, I have a very good med school friend who's a geriatrician who helps me all the time. And so we talked about sort of bringing together geriatrics and the caregiving component and sort of some of the knowledge around it with the mindfulness and the coaching. And that was what all of us who were spending time with our parents, I'll just say, need, because really in the end, we want to feel proud and connected and like we did the best we could. And a lot of our physician mindsets gets very much in the way of that. The other thing that I have seen is that our role in caring for aging parents also gets very much in the way of our practicing medicine, and that it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of time. People feel very distracted and depleted and exhausted and burnt out. And so if we can help them navigate that a little bit more smoothly, that helps everybody as well. And mostly because we all just want to enjoy our relationships with our parents. And I think that there's so much angst caught up in those relationships, in mother-daughter relationships, and just as our role as children caring for adults can be a tricky role in and of itself. So last week, I talked about the role of intention and sort of how you want to show up and the feelings and energy you want to bring to this issue, season of life, relationship, and really how you want to feel at the end. And we talked about a lot of reasons why we fall into feelings and energy we don't want to bring and strategies for that. So there is a recording of that if any of you are interested in watching it, because I'm going to skip over most of that today. We also talked about mindfulness as a guide to sort of how you do want to show up, and the role of curiosity, acceptance, generosity, and non-striving, many of which are tricky for us as physicians. We're not the best at just accepting things. We tend to like to jump and fix and manage and control. We're sometimes curious, but we're generally fixers rather than stepping back and sort of asking good questions especially when it's our parents who have perhaps a different idea of how they want to do it. And then we are strivers generally. And so showing up non-striving, which is one of the main tenets of mindfulness, can be super helpful here. But we show up striving, wanting to do the best thing and wanting to do the right thing. And again, being helpful and fixing and people pleasing is sort of our natural tendency as healers and physicians. There were a number of other things I said, but I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of a background. And tonight I wanted to focus on more of these habit thought patterns that cause us trouble, and some specific ones. And I thought I'd frame it, and I mean this very lightheartedly, with why we are the problem and not our parents, because we like to make our parents the problem. We also like to make their choices the problem. We like to make their diseases, perhaps their Alzheimer's or whatever it is going on, that's the cancer, that's the problem. And the beautiful thing about us being the problem is that we can fix that and change that. And that's something that's in our control. And so often we focus on things that are not in our control. And I know at least one of you has done the parent with presence group that I do. And it's the same thing, right? Our children are the problem. Their behavior is the problem. The nanny is the problem. And in fact, when we can start to look at our own role, it's not because it's all our fault. It's just that that's an area that we have control over and we can improve upon. And so part of the focus here is that on patterns that we tend to have as, now I used to say sort of physicians and the way we were trained to think, which I like because it's very non-judgmental and it takes the blame away. But these also tend to be more prominent in women, and you're all women here. They also tend to be more prominent in people who are sort of type A high achievers. And all of those things lead us to being women physicians. But I think noticing that a lot of other people who maybe aren't physicians, but tend to be in that type A high achiever category, also have many of these habitual thought patterns. And so really what I like to do is assign no blame. This is just ways that we were taught, raised, or and that was sealed in during our medical training. And when I share a little bit up front before we get into the coaching, I'm hoping some of you will want to bring something to our coaching conversation. I'm just giving an overview of some of these thought patterns. And I think part of it's in the noticing. And I often say, once you're aware of the thought patterns, you can begin to shift. But I also really want to emphasize that when you do the coaching, and hopefully someone will show up to ask questions or to get a little coaching, is where the mindset shifts really happen. And until you start to apply it to your own life and start to look at you in your particular situation, that's where the shift happens and the relief happens. And so knowing about it is one thing. And I know so many physicians that are like, well, I heard this, and so I'm sure I can do it myself. And that's what I thought for a long time. But the power of having someone else reflect back to you and help you sort of see where you're showing up is really, really powerful. And I'm actually thinking back to one of the people who wanted coaching last week was really struggling with her father. And her story was that she was responsible. It was all up to her. She had this burden. And when it all fell apart, she would have to clean it up. And those of us who are not in that mindset think like, wow, that's clearly why it's such a struggle. And yet many of us fall right into that. We fall into that victimhood. And because of our training, we are the over-responsible one who carries the burden, and we accept the burden. And in fact, we often assign ourselves the burden. And so when our parents are still competent, they actually get to decide. And so, we might think, well, they're going to make bad decisions and we'll have to clean it up. But that's not actually our role. And so I think sometimes we just assign it to ourselves. And so I would really encourage you to sort of think about the stories that you tell and what is your actual role. And even if your role is very active as a caregiver, tell a really good story about it. Like you want to help, you get to help, you choose to help, as opposed to you have to, or you need to, or it's your responsibility. Because I would say any of us who feel like it's our responsibility, we actually want to help. We actually choose to help, we get to help. And when we approach it from that energy, it's such a different situation than when we approach it from, this is my responsibility, it's a heavy burden, and I will have to clean it up. Honestly, even if you do have to clean it up, which it very likely won't turn out as badly as you think, that's one of the coaching tenets I teach. But thinking that up front is just going to make the whole situation worse. And in fact, may make it turn out worse because you show up with more of a judgmental negative energy as you're interacting with this person that you actually love and want to have a good relationship with. So I thought that I would just dive into why we are the problem. And I say this with love, and that some of the reasons why we're the problem is that we tend to catastrophize. And so we think that the worst case scenario will happen, something terrible will be happening. We focus on the negative and what's wrong. I mentioned a few of these things last week. That doesn't make us the best. We think it makes us the best advocate. But if you think about our parents and their experience on the other end, they actually might not want us even involved when we show up that way. And so if you're wanting to have this connection and work together and be on the same team, noticing our tendencies to that. And I don't know what all of your specialties are, but if you're an ER or ICU or anesthesia, like you're really an expert at this, and OBGYN too. We're really focused on thinking about worst case scenario, less so in primary care. We also tend to have an urgency to fix things, and our parents very often have a very different timeline of how to fix it. And so we then judge them for it. And that judgment, when you bring that judgment energy, we're not in our best collaborative problem solving mode. And one of the reasons why all of this matters so much is that in the end, all we have is our relationships. I think many of you hear this, and yet we get fixated. Our role is the doctor role, it's the fixer role, and that really interferes with that relationship role. And so I think it's really, really helpful to notice where your agenda is not your parents' agenda. My friend and colleague Mary actually joined last week, and she talks a lot about honoring your parents and knowing what their goals are and really focusing your energy on that. And she told this story about how her mother-in-law's goal was getting a picture framed. It had nothing to do with anything medical. And here she was showing up as the dementia expert, thinking she really needed to get the best care for her father-in-law and all of these things. And what her mother-in-law wanted was a picture framed. And that actually made her whole life feel much more calm and peaceful. It was something she could control. And so we often come in with this different energy. And so recognizing that our purpose is really to be of help to, she uses this word, honor your parents. I like to use instead the word love your parents. And so for me, like, what would love do is something I ask all the time. And she likes to honor. So I think we all have a specific approach to it, and you get to choose what that is. We tend also to have very much a strong sense of right or wrong. There's a right way to do it. There's a right way to care for dementia. There's a right way to care for strokes. There's a right way to care for arrhythmias. There's a right time to go to the ER, and our parents picked the wrong time. And so I think just acknowledging that there is very often not a right or a wrong way, and however they do it is fine. It's their way, and they sort of get to choose. They get to choose whether to go to the ER or not. I will say my mother told me last night this extremely interesting story about how the admitting physician told her about the DNR and what her take of it was. And so she immediately was not going to be DNR based on what he said, even though I know that my mom wouldn't actually want many of those things. But like, I'm thinking like, that's not the right decision if you're in your 80s and you are having these health issues. And yet she gets to make that decision, right? Is there a right or a wrong decision? And she gets to respond to however this probably sweet resident told her whatever he told her. I only know her version, so I don't know what he told her. But I think just realizing there isn't a right or wrong, we tend to very much bring in right or wrong, and we want our family to get the best care. But I would say it's the best care for them. And so stepping out of that knowledge, our knowledge and expertise actually really gets in the way of our relationships. And I think it can often get in the way. So I'm a new grandma. I'm really cognizant of not letting it get in the way of that. Like, I've decided to let my child raise his child however he wants, unless it's really extremely dangerous, like a home birth or no vaccines, like then I'll speak up. But I realize that, and it's very much similar to the way that we want to interact with our parents, because I think ultimately, if you're thinking back to that intention that I talked about last week, if your intention is love or connection, or even maybe feeling proud at the end, it would never guide you to sort of micromanage the situation. It would guide you to be an advisor or a consultant is what I see my role as now. And I've never been a consultant because I'm a primary care doctor. So I actually now, hold on, that would be about my mother, but I'll pause it for a second. I really like this approach because I know that many people I send to see a consultant don't do what they say. And I don't necessarily always agree with the consultant. So it brings in that room to just be flexible, which is not our strong suit as physicians. And so I think stepping out of that. The other thing that we tend to do, and I'm really struggling with this, so I always like to be transparent, is over personalize it. So like, if you recommend that your parents go to the ER and they don't go, we make that they don't believe us or they don't trust us or something. We tell a story about that. And I used to tell a story that they didn't trust me, but it's actually got nothing to do with that. First of all, nobody ever wants to go to the ER. Or yesterday, my mom went to the ER without consulting me. And I was like, that's so interesting. Why didn't she consult me? Now I just go into curiosity. I wonder why. She did tell me later that they had given her very specific parameters and she had that parameter on her thing. And so she went in and I was like, well, that's good. It's actually really nice. But I think we often tend to make it about us or why don't they call us or why don't they take our advice? I know all of this stuff and they should take my advice. And I think if you look back at our training, we were actually taught to over personalize and taught to personalize our patients' decisions. And it's about us. We didn't explain it well enough. If you go down to vaccines, right? If they don't do the vaccines, or it's about, I think back to the way that they HEDIS measure immunization rates, and they're about the doctor, or they say they are, and yet they're not really. They're mostly about the patients. And so I think just recognizing that that's very often our habit can be really helpful, and to remember that it's not you. I think at some points in time, and someone just joined us, hi, who has a mom who's, if your parent is particularly in a state of dementia, it's not personal, and that, but there's that middle ground where everything feels personal. And I think especially, I'll just throw out, since we're all women here, mothers and daughters, everything is personal. And so just remembering that it's very likely not personal. We also tend to be over responsible, take responsibility for things that are not our responsibility. And I bring this up in a lot of physician coaching, and we do it as parents, we do it as children, we do it as spouses, and then we take responsibility, and then we're resentful and bitter that other people don't. And I will say I'm one of 3 children. And so I'm the only doctor. And so very often we take that responsibility. And yet I think when you acknowledge that your habit tends to be over responsibility, you can, I'm really good now. In fact, that call was from my brother. I've assigned him to go bring my parents dinner, right? Because he can't really help with the medical stuff. But I was like, they're really tired and they're going to need this. And he's perfectly happy to do it. Whereas yesterday I suggested that he go in and help them advocate, because I know they don't want me to advocate at this point. And he was like, I can't do that. I don't know how. And I was like, okay, well, let's figure out. So figuring out who can be responsible and who can help, but also to not take responsibility for things that aren't in your control, especially if they're in your parents' control. We tend to want to take responsibility. And I will say, even around safety issues. And so many of you will agree with me, and I won't give all the details, that my mother is not particularly safe at home. She's 100% a fall risk, but she's not interested. They tried to send her home with walker. She's not interested. She wants to be in her own house. She wants to do it her way. And I really stepped back and thought, okay, well, if I were in my 80s and that were me, I would be actually asking for the exact same thing. Right? She wants to sleep in her bedroom and she gets to choose. But I think that we tend to think that's our responsibility. We know what a fall risk is and we want to jump right in and change it. And yet, when I have stepped back now, my relationships with my parents are so much better, and they'll actually share a lot more. I actually notice that their parents will often share less when they think that you're judging or when they think that you don't think they're making the right decision. And so if you are neutral, which is an incredibly powerful coaching tool, just show up neutral, everything tends to go much more smoothly. So I really encourage thinking about how you're showing up. We also talk about physicians tend to come from guilt in terms of way that we show up helping others. So I would encourage all of you to look at what role guilt plays and how you show up with aging relatives. In-laws, I think, are even trickier because they're not your parents, and yet they're also easier because they're not your parents. And oftentimes we get called in to consult on loved ones. And so again, thinking about where you're coming from guilt versus where you're coming from want to, choose to, get to. We also tend to have very much of a self-sacrifice martyrdom mentality. And so notice where that's, and even the word service, which comes from the word servant. And so come from caring. Like, what would caring do? Caring for you, caring for these other people, whoever they might be in your life, and stepping out of that. I feel like martyrs end up martyrs. People who self-sacrifice end up sacrificed and cranky and burnt out. And so not leading from those, which for those of you that were trained when I was trained, that was incredibly glorified. And if you didn't show up that way, you were a bad doctor. And so I think realizing that long-term, it's not helpful. And when we're in our relationships, we tend to show up that way. And I always say hand to heart, but as parents, as siblings, as children. And so we bring that to a lot of our relationships, oftentimes even marriages. And so just thinking about how you're maybe taking responsibility for things that aren't yours and trying to control things out of your control. And then I think the last thing I'll bring up, which I also brought up a bit last week, is this idea of trust. And we tend to not trust. And I say this again with love, but like, we were trained to trust and confirm, and we don't necessarily trust what our patients tell us. We don't necessarily trust that when our parents go into the ER, they're going to get good care, or when they go to the hospital, like, we see it as our role to come in and advocate. We know all the things that could go wrong. But when we bring this lack of trust, our parents hear that, and then they don't trust. And then it becomes this whole cycle of distrust. And so I think there is a place where maybe we need to check in and figure out who we can trust, or do we trust? And obviously, if you think your parent is not getting good care, I wouldn't say don't say anything. But I think we can gift them that they should likely trust their caregivers rather than not trusting the people that are caring for them. And I would say 99% of our colleagues are pretty darn trustworthy. And so I think instilling that lack of trust, and then trusting ourselves too, that we'll know when to step in and when to step back. I think this lack of trust, I see really as very expensive for so many physicians, leading to a lot of burnout and leading to a lot of irritation, exhaustion, frustrations, resentment of others. And so I think it's a beautiful thing just to start to notice where that's popping up in your life. The last thing, actually, so I brought up this idea of we think people should respect us and take our advice. We also have a lot of shoulds about how the other people should behave, and we have very high expectations. And so I think just realizing where that might come in, what you think your parents should do, what you think you should do, what you think your siblings should do, what you think the doctors taking care of them should do. And so I would say one of the key tools is like manage your expectations, or drop your expectations, honestly. And when I use this word expensive, what I mean is energetically and emotionally expensive. It might also cost you money, but generally it's exhausting, and generally emotionally we're just plumb worn out. And so those are the reasons that I say that we are the problem. And if you think about all of those things, when we can shift those things, the whole relationship shifts. And in the type of relationship coaching that I do, and I call it mindful relationship coaching because I always infuse these tenets of mindfulness into it also. We say that you can change, one person can change an entire relationship. So a parent can change their relationship with their children, a child can change their relationship with their parents, one person in a marriage can change it. It doesn't mean you're going to stay, but we always have this idea in our culture that I'll change this and they'll change this. And what are you going to do? And it's sort of this tug of war in traditional like counseling. And when I discovered that you could change things just by changing you, like dramatically, it feels so much better. You can change your whole experience of clinic by just changing your thoughts. It doesn't mean you want to stay. It doesn't mean you want to do it forever, but it's so much better. And you don't want to leave until you do that. Same thing with your parents. You can change your thoughts. They don't have to change at all. Their disease doesn't have to change at all. and your experience can change completely. And so that's really where I come from on this. And so the solutions, again, are also all you. I know ideally our parents would change and their caregivers would change and they would take the right medicine and they would, all these things wouldn't happen that happen as we get older. But when we change our thoughts about them and we change how we show up, things tend to change dramatically. And so the first one that I thought I'd share tonight is literally showing up with what would love do. And I ask myself this question multiple times a day. So what would love do for me? And I will give the example that yesterday I stayed home. My parents are local. I could have gone to the ER. Love for me wouldn't have shown up in the ER. Interestingly, I did volunteer at one point and they said, no, we don't want you. That was even better. But asking that question, like, what would love do for me? And what I decided is, well, I could volunteer, but I'm not going to go, right? That love for me wouldn't go. If they really want me to, I'll show up. And love for them was not showing up also. Was it being a consultant? Was it, I think asking that question really guides you about, for example, love would not go in and insist my parents move somewhere else right now. They don't want to. That would actually be worse for them than some catastrophic outcome. And I actually know that. So I think this love question really keeps you on track and it helps you when you get in a sticky spot. So love would speak up if you thought it was unsafe. Love would recommend, all the things that they recommend for old people, but it wouldn't force the issue. Love would be patient, get you out of that urgency bias. And so I really feel like that energy, when you bring it to this situation, is so powerful. And I mentioned this last week, but hospitals in Vietnam, the name that they use means house of love. And so I think if you think about this healthcare as sort of a house of love, which works great for pediatricians, but I also think it works great in geriatrics and probably the whole way along. It's just not I don't know how well it works in the OR. But I think it's a really helpful way to actually make decisions and make these medical decisions and palliative care decisions and hospice decisions. And so I think thinking about it from that way, it's this very activating energetic thing that you can bring to these relationships that's super powerful. I think focusing on what's in your control is the most important thing you can do. And what's not in your control, let it go, because that's where we get the bitterness and frustration. And we're perfectionists. We have super high expectations. We think everyone should do it the right way, but other people may not want to, and actually their way might end up being the right way for them. I remember one of the coaching epiphanies I had for myself is that my way was the right way for me. I was always looking externally to see what the right way was. And in medicine, we're trained, right, by HEDIS scores, and we call them MPS scores or Press-Ganey scores, and by all the other scores out there in the world. And that's the right way if you have a better score. But I think kind of recognizing that what's right for them is right for them, and it may not be what's right for you. I always like to think we have shared vision in that they want to be happy and healthy as long as they can. And I would like them to be happy and healthy as long as they can be. And I think we all want to feel love and connection. And so I really like this idea of realizing that we have the same outcome, just like me. They want all these things. That's a coaching tool that I love to share. And they have a different way of going about it. And I don't have to micromanage it or control it. And honestly, I'm not the doctor. The other big one that I love is asking your future self. And in this case, while it might seem morbid, I will say, like, well, when my parents have passed away, what will I wish I did now? Well, I wish I had shown up. And I don't know when that's going to be. But I know, want to feel like I did my best, and I want to feel good about what I did. And I will really want to feel like the time that I spent with them was beautiful, loving, connected, and all of those things. And so that's a really helpful question for me. And sometimes it's helpful to shrink it up. So like yesterday, I said to myself, well, what will I wish I'd done tomorrow? Well, I wish I had gotten in the car and gone over there or not. That can actually help you decide in the moment, because your future self is usually pretty wise. And we usually take that question from the standpoint of things turned out okay. We don't know what okay is, but just sort of like, because you would say, well, if something terrible happens tonight, I wish I'd gone. And if it doesn't, I won't. Then it's not a useful question. And I think it allows you this space to get out of your catastrophizing, which is why it's so helpful. A couple other things I would say is there's a podcast next week on judgment. And that's what occurred to me here is drop your judgment of yourself, drop your judgment of them. Because if you can come in neutral, or in mindfulness, we say hands wide open, all of a sudden there's this spaciousness for connection. And I know that a lot of aging people feel very judged about the way they do things, and they're old school and they don't do this. And we tend to judge about how well they can take care of themselves. And I will just offer sort of hand to heart, as physicians, we're very, very judgmental of ourselves and everyone else. We're judgmental of our patients. You can listen to next week's podcast. It's just me talking about judgment for a half an hour. So I won't get into it now, but I think it's really helpful to notice how you show up that way. And for me, showing up with non-judgment, which is again, one of those tenets of mindfulness, is super, super helpful. And then not resisting reality is the other one. So resisting their reality, whatever disease, or I don't know what Sally's an adult doctor, chronic condition or whatever's going on, whatever you all call that, don't resist that, and not resisting how they respond to it. And then the other thing I would say is not resisting your own feelings about it. You can be sad, you can be disappointed, you can be angry. I think we tend to think that a good daughter or a good doctor wouldn't feel sad, wouldn't be grieving, wouldn't be disappointed in whatever choice they made, and I think when we allow those feelings, that's where we can actually show up with much more grace and presence. When we're trying to resist them and sort of not allow, especially, and I'm saying allow the bad feelings. The good feelings tend to show up anyway, but allow the bad feelings rather than trying to control them. That's where we get that connection. And I think we think in medicine that, we have to show up well all the time. And we don't. We just get to show up human, and especially here. And I think sometimes if you acknowledge that you're sad, your parents are sad, that's really helpful. You get this connection. But we think that we can't do that. And so, when I was trained, we didn't show any feelings. We weren't supposed to. We weren't supposed to have any. But I think realizing that we all do, and that actually, by allowing that, you can allow it with them, you can allow it at home. But when we resist how we feel, it becomes a much bigger problem. And so allowing frustration would be another one, irritability, annoyance. It's when we resist it, it grows, and then it gets in the way of everything else. And so that gets in the way of you showing up how you would like. So I think I'm going to pause here and see if anyone wants some coaching or has questions, and then I can talk about a few more things. But I think it's much more helpful for people to ask questions, and feel free to turn your box on if you like. If you have questions, I would love it if you do that, but you don't have to if you're driving. Please be safe. Anyone have questions, thoughts?
I don't have questions, but I just really I've been taking notes. Yeah. I really appreciate all the points. And the last thing that you said reminds me of somebody who once said, what we resist persists, right? Yeah. I just love that one.
Yeah. I think it grows even, honestly.
I think so.
Yeah. And so, we are not good at not resisting as physicians. I think we're always resisting. We're resisting the changes in healthcare. We're resisting the EMR. We're resisting all the things. And so we're experts at it. So I think we bring it to everything. And once you realize that, and I say experts at it with love, I'm an expert at resistance, that I think not only does it stop growing, but it tends to recede. So I often say what you practice grows. So if we practice resistance, we become an expert at it. And what we stop practicing recedes. And so if you can look at some of those thought patterns that we have, and that was just, there's many more, but those are the ones that came to mind as I was thinking about this today, that then you can practice different ones. You can practice showing up with love. You can practice showing up with acceptance. You can practice showing up, focusing on what's in your control. Anybody else have thoughts, comments? Anyone need coaching? Silence.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean,
yeah, go for it. Tell me, let's bring it up and it'll make it more fun.
Okay, so the call that I actually just got off of right before this one was a family call.
Yeah.
as in siblings,
Yes.
um, addressing disposition for my dad, who's 90 plus and
Okay.
living a widow of a year and a half now, and wanting to stay in the home
Mhm.
that is remote from everybody else.
Okay.
Now, I don't even know really what to talk about at this point because we've kind of it's really spent the last year um, uh, trying to allow him to come to the realization. And I'm listening to my own language
Yeah, yeah,
as,
yeah. I love it.
you know,
Yeah.
and thinking about how, yeah, it was some of the comments that you just made in terms of, you know, we know what's best for a
Yep.
parent.
Yeah.
But but I mean, you know, it's a large single family home with a reasonable amount of property to address, and some safety measures were put in place already.
Mhm.
But the reality is that, you know, there are steps to navigate in the house and
Mhm.
to get into the house, and even just walking around. I mean, anything can happen at any
Yeah.
point, right? So I mean, it's not like the fall risk is not real,
Mhm.
and they're remote from everyone. And so anyhow, I guess all the bottom, I guess I don't know. I'm not even really sure. You'll have to guide me in terms of
Yeah.
what I should even be asking in the first place. But I will say that that I still, you know, I still struggle, even though we've made some strides with the decision about finding what's going to make him happy. Um, it's still a work in progress,
Is
and
he happy there? What does he say he wants? Because the other thing I'll say is we tend to not listen to what they want. We have an idea of what's right. You're 90. You shouldn't be living remotely with stairs by yourself in a large house with property, right? That makes perfect sense in our mind. And yet you told me your dad wants to stay there.
mm-hmm. Yes, and so I mean, and as I said, this is a work in progress. So
Yeah.
I could
Yeah.
maybe back up to say, you know, 2 weeks ago. But he's transitioned to winter's coming and it's kind of
Mhm.
lonely and it's going to be cold, and so yeah, I don't want to be here anymore.
So what if you
But
know, I
that's
think
and
figuring out
he,
what you guys all want, like just like you, he wants to be happy and safe and warm and not lonely. Maybe he's ready, but I do think sometimes um just collaborating with him, asking, you know, how does he want to feel over his next few years, however many years he has left. I always coach, as I say, from the feeling line, which is interesting. And really, I should be coaching you, but it sounds like everyone's kind of not sure what the right answer is. And if you get out of there being a right and wrong answer, because I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here. If he really wanted to stay there and he happened to fall and that was it, that would be fine because he would want to stay there. And he would feel like he got to make the decisions he wanted. I think sometimes we think it's our job to keep them alive as long as possible or to, you know, so if they have, competence, then I think that they actually get to choose. But maybe offering him, sometimes they think it's a burden, right? For someone to have to care for him or if he lived with them. And so to me, it's really asking what would be fun for him or what would feel good for him. Like if he could choose anything he wanted. Because to me, if I were the, you know, 3 or 4, I don't know how long he's going to live. Let's say 5 years to 95. What will you wish you'd done right now with your dad? Just you, because you can't also control your siblings. And then we can talk about the sibling issue. Are they all doctors or just you?
and
You're
then
all doctors.
and one engineer, yeah,
Okay. Okay.
one engineer slash nurse. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. 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 Okay. That's actually helpful, I think. Whether if you're all doctors, there's even more controversy. Um, but what if you all have the same ultimate goal to honor your dad?
And I would say that, well, that's not even a what if. I think
You do. Yeah.
that
Yes.
is everyone's goal.
Yeah.
Everyone's goal is to honor him and to help him and enable him, facilitate his happiness, and in really whatever way that looks for him, as long as it's within some level of reasonability,
Yeah.
just from practically speaking, and you know, and also just you know, safety wise, etc. And I think that, all of us are, I think that I would say that I'm the one who tends to be the more, the sort of slower to kind of get to that. Okay. Everyone's in a different specialty, right? And so you've got also these sort of specialty specific
Yep.
ways of thinking,
Yeah.
right? So you've got these, this is what needs to be done, and and let's get on with it. And I'm kind of you need some time to sort of figure this out. And if we kind of backslide a little bit, which we have, it's happened. There's that too. So there's that dynamic.
What if it's okay? Because if there's no right way to do it and there's no right pace to do it, and because I think that the answer here is to sort of open up curiosity, everyone's curiosity, and like creativity to come up with the thing. Because where I think you're struggling is there's a right way, there's a right time. We want to optimize his happiness. And my thought is, if there were 5 right ways to do it, then it's just a matter of picking one. You can also always change. Say you move him, I don't know who he's moving in with or whatever. Say he's moving in with someone, or he's moving into a nursing home and he hates it. You can move him. I think we also think that like, we're going to make this one change. It's a very doctor mentality, and we're never going to change again. My thought is he can change, and in 3 months you can change again. And so instead of like narrowing your thoughts here, I would actually widen them, not because you think that like it's not to give you more choices so you can't decide, but it's to say all of these choices will likely turn out fine. Because I think we also look at it as like, which one could go wrong? Let's avoid the wrong choice. But if they would all turn out fine, what would he want to do? What would you guys want to do? And what if there's 5 different answers to that? That's even better, because they're all good choices. I think sometimes we're saying, well, that just makes it impossible. And I would say that's fantastic, because there's 5 choices or 4 choices.
Yeah. So yeah, that's maybe like an attitude shift, because I know that having too many options is actually overwhelming and draining.
Well, it could be, but how beautiful. We think that in medicine, but actually that means you have so many choices that could all turn out well. And how great is that? You just have to change your thoughts about it.
Yeah.
I think also staying out of, notice your judgment that like you're slower than your siblings at coming to whatever, right? Like, what if everyone's just going to come, and we all come to this in our own time. We're all bringing our own brains and our own thoughts and our own experience. I think that's what makes this project, I'll call it that, even more complicated, right? Because they're siblings, everyone wants to agree and wants to respect each other, and none of you are going to have the same opinion. And then you have your parent or parents who are also going to have different opinions and different ideas. And so I might ask this question, and it might seem a little bit weird, but what would love do about your dad right now where does he live in winter?
Well, I mean, it has historically he's lived in the home, which is in the Northeast, so it's a cold climate.
Cold. That's, I was like, it's cold somewhere. Okay, so in the Northeast.
No, yeah.
And so what would love do about a dad who's in his 90s who lives in the Northeast and winter is coming?
Take him into one or more of the children's homes, and preferably in a place where it's mild in the winter, and enjoy be a snowbird.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So that doesn't even seem, it's not like a definitive change.
Right. Yeah.
And what if I just had this idea? So this is when you start thinking, like when you said that, I was like, how many siblings do you have?
4.
So I just proposed he was going to live 5 more years. I don't actually know that, but he could live with each of you for the winter for 1 more year, and everybody would get time with him. Nobody would be burdened. Right. Wouldn't that be awesome?
Yes, except that that's been offered and he's declined that.
What is his suggestion?
Oh, to just leave things the way that they are.
Okay, and what's the problem with that?
Just seems like it's a problem. It's a situation that's fraught with risk, and even I would say unnecessary risk, and also a lot of anxiety over things that one can't control from distance.
Yeah, so that's why, though. Notice it's your anxiety of what you
Yes.
can't control.
Yeah.
And he says that he would rather do that. I don't know, because sometimes people don't want to burden people. So then I would switch to ask your future self. Let's go to next spring. We don't know how it's turned out. It's turned out okay. What will you wish you had done now? What will you wish you had said? Say it doesn't turn out okay, in fact, like he falls. What will you wish you had said and done now? Because I don't think you wish you moved him against his will.
No.
Will you?
Mhm. No.
What will you wish you had? So I always say what's in your control is what you do, what you say, what you think and feel about what he decides to do. And then this is my favorite part, the tone and energy with which you do all of it.
Right.
Which is really what's in your control.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So what will you wish you had done or said?
That he's loved and that he's welcome,
Okay.
to choose the thing that is best for him, and I want to feel that basically had the discussion that and make sure that he truly understood,
Okay.
which as an aside is
That question.
exactly, do you really, if
But
you
again,
had an opportunity to explore, maybe you would feel differently and actually make a different choice. And so that's being presented to you, i.e. the example of living, living with one with
what if you offer that he
one.
can change his mind at any time, no matter which he picks?
Yeah, I don't, I mean, I feel like actually, I feel like that's been presented, like that's actually been said, but
When this idea of understanding is fascinating too, because I think as physicians, we really want people to understand. And if they understand, then it's good. And we want them to understand, I say this with love, our point of view. So if I'm trying to convince someone to get a vaccine, right, I want them to make sure that they know all the risks and they understand. Then it's okay if they decline. But if I think they didn't understand, then it's not okay. And I think that applies here.
It does, and there's a ton of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we bring in the competence, does he really understand at 90? Is he cognitively okay? Does he know what it means? And generally, if they are choosing a choice that we wouldn't make, I'm so guilty of this, that's why I'm smiling, that they don't understand. So we should explain it again till they understand.
Yes. Or have you given it sufficient, reflection, and have you been introspective about this, and have you really taken the time? And that actually I've had many conversations on that.
Well, so how many I'm just going to flip it here. How many conversations have you had about this? How many times have you all tried to make sure he understands?
I don't know.
A lot, probably.
Oh,
right?
yeah. I mean, well over. Yeah. I mean, 20, maybe. I mean, a lot.
So, yeah. So my guess is he understands your point of view. Just saying, but who knows? The other thing
Or
is
knows what it is.
he knows what it is, and that's really all you can control, is that so we talk a lot in relationship coaching about a manual, and you're telling him, it's knowledge, it's sharing, this is what I think is the right thing to do. My manual is that a dad, and you won't use these words with him, but a dad who's 90 plus, who's a widow, who lives in the Northeast, should not be living alone, because he's a fall risk and all of these things, and it's cold and it's hard to get to the grocery store, whatever it might be. His manual is that it's okay for him to do that. And that's what a 90-year-old can do that, and it would be fine. And so just realizing that you have different stories about it. Neither is necessarily right. It could turn out fine, or it might not. We don't know. So in medicine, we say it's a good decision if it turns out fine, and we try to mitigate risk. So Mary, who is the geriatrician, she has taught me, and I didn't know this before, she calls it harm reduction. And so meaning that if your parents want to stay, he wants to stay there, how do you reduce harm while he's there, rather than sort of forcing him to be somewhere different? Again, I'm not saying there's a right answer, but what's in your control is to share your knowledge, share your concerns, share the information. Sounds like you have, and then let him decide. The other thought that I think is super helpful, if you relate this back to medicine, I think it's really going to see how your brain, especially if you have other healthcare people, we again think that if the decision was bad if it turns out badly, but we can only make the decision in the moment. And so if you think about like an unexpected outcome or a bad outcome, right? Right here, you're taking the medicine assumption that you will be to blame if something bad happens. You will have made a mistake. You will be at fault. And that's actually not true in medicine either, because all we can do is, and this is the phrase I like to say, make the best decision we can with the information we have in the moment. And that's all your dad can do. And that's all you can do. And then the thing that really blew my mind is you get to make it the right decision. So if he's going to stay there, you're going to go all in and make it the right decision, make it as safe as he can, support him, believe in him, call an offer that if anytime, if it's January, you're like, if you want to come to, I don't know where you live, Florida, feel free. We've got a bedroom for you. We would love to have you. Or maybe he gets breaks, or maybe, so I think going all in on whatever decision you go in, and we can gift our belief in someone that they can do it. We can gift our belief in him, and that will actually help him experience it in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So if he decides and you all decide that he can do that, and you've all expressed your opinion and he says, no, I'm staying here, to me, it's like support him fully, go all in on that decision.
Mm-hmm. But that's not a wrong decision. That's
No.
not a wrong choice.
No. The other thought I have, and I guess some people would disagree with me, but I have a mother-in-law who actually passed away, but she had a pretty significant stroke, and post-stroke, she wanted to go live in Paris for 9 months by herself. And I have a sister-in-law who did not like that idea. She said, something terrible is going to happen. I'm going to have to fly there and rescue her. And there's all these things she can't do. My mother-in-law spent 9 months in Paris, had a fantastic time, and died later on her couch eating popcorn. And I would have felt terrible if this was like her dream to go do this someday. And she was going to do it post-stroke or not. And, she actually had, I'll say people are resourceful. She had a restaurant she would go to where they would cut her meat because she couldn't. And she had a wine shop that would open her wine bottles, and she would just pick them up a block from her little, I don't know what they call them, flats or whatever. And for her, it was something she really wanted to do. And so it would not have been our place to stop her, even if something terrible had happened and we had to go. She actually said that, like, if I die in Paris, that's fine. And so I do think that sometimes we think it's that made no rational sense. And yet she really wanted to do it. And in the end, it turned out fine. And she's very happy. And I'm very happy she went. I'm not ever followed up with my sister-in-law, but it is what it is on that topic. So I wonder if you can kind of just you make the best decision you can. And when you go in on it, you support her. So we all went to visits, check in on her every few months at different times, so that would be going all in on the decision.
Right. And
Whatever
you said, and your expression was something, gift them the decision, I think.
Gift them your belief in them. So if he makes the decision, he wants to stay. If you're all sitting there saying, we think this is a terrible idea, he can't do it, he's going to be so lonely, it's going to be awful, that's not gifting him anything, right? But if he says, I really want to try it, and you can believe that he's making the best decision for himself and that you trust him, and that if he changes his mind, you'll be there to support him. It's kind of reminds me of like a teenager, right? You let them make the decision, you believe in them. And then if they want to do, you're still there. You have their back if something else happens. Not really a teenager, but young adult, maybe. You're going to have their back anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of getting back to what you the question you had asked earlier, which is, what would your future self
recommend? Yeah.
Or no, I'm sorry. It wasn't that. Actually, it was what would love look like?
Yeah. That's my favorite question.
And
so what would love do if I ask you that now, after you've kind of, this is only a few of the points, but I think it gets you into a different decision-making space. So what would love do about this 90-year-old dad who's a widow who wants to stay? I'm going to call him on a farm in the Northeast. I know that's probably not true, but you
not a farm
in the cold or Northeast.
There is a lot of outside work.
That's where I got that idea.
There is a lot of property to manage. It would say, I love you, and I'm grateful for the time that we have had so far, and I want you to be happy in this current chapter of your life, and so I want to do everything that I can to help facilitate that. I think that would be, I think it would be about just saying the right words so that he does really truly know in his heart that which quite honestly he does. I mean, he has in the last, even in more recent times.
Yeah,
Just
I think sometimes too,
being
when we
more verbal
change
about
our
that.
energy, so we're not in a panic about it, he might actually come back and say, yes, thank you all so much, and now I'm gonna come stay with you for winter. Like, that often happens where like they then feel like they're heard, they've been seen, and then they shift how they respond. Because sometimes they're responding in reaction to sort of this, we have to make the right decision. And so that creates this pressure. And when the pressure's off, he might get to January and say, I'm on my way, guys, here I come, right? Or can someone come pick me up? So I think just we tend to not be soft about these things. We tend to be very worried and the catastrophizing and the focusing on the negative. And there could be positive about being in an environment that he loves, that he shared with his wife for a long, long time. Like maybe there's something there that he just feels like he needs to be there. And then the last bit I would say is, let's just say he decides to do that because it sounds like he's competent. Okay. If something bad happens, it's also having your own back, that you made the best decision you could, and this was what he wanted. Because then we say, well, something bad happens, I made a wrong decision, I'm a bad daughter, we didn't do the right thing, we didn't take care. And maybe that was actually the best, like, we don't know, but I think we tend to immediately flip on ourselves and doubt ourselves and judge ourselves. And so making sure that you're going to feel very calm and grounded with your decision. And you would obviously have to feel that way when you make it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think really for me, there's no right answer. I think we think there's a right answer, but there isn't a right answer. He has so many options. And that story, I can't remember exactly what you said, but something about the options and the choices and how it's overwhelming. I would change that story. Because that's an expensive story. I remember thinking when we came out of COVID that there was so many things we could do and there was so much choice. This was a fake coming out of COVID at some point, but that was kind of the message. And I was overwhelmed by like, well, now what does one do? And then through coaching, I was like, well, there's actually like 98% of things in the world I don't want to do. I'm really only choosing between 2%. And then it was like, oh, I'll try this. Like, then the pressure was off. And so 5 choices or 4 choices is actually not that many given the universe of choices out there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's that nice medium where there is, it's not too limiting.
Yeah.
Too much.
Yeah. Because I think when we tell stories that feel good, and whatever choice your dad makes, tell a story that feels good to everyone. Because if you're sitting at home saying, I have this dad who just is insisting on doing this and it's very unsafe and it's like all those things, then you just have stress, everybody.
Okay, so yeah, I can take that and change. Yeah, I can change.
Even if, let's say he decides, this just came to mind, like, what if you gift him this year in his house, one more year, and then you'll reassess. So it's not a 5-year decision. You're going to gift him, or even till January, and you'll reassess. And then you'll gift him till March, and then you'll reassess, like, because he wants to be there. Maybe, I don't know if he wants through the winter, like gift him this last winter in his house, because it's really important to him.
Yeah. Well, we're making progress.
Yeah.
As I said in this, and then even just in this last week, there's been a shift, and so he feels inclined to move on out. It'll just
and maybe you won't know, like,
Yeah.
wouldn't it be lovely if he decided to come and stay with one of you and feel really happy about it?
Yeah, that would be nice.
And so he might get there. He's, interestingly, you said you were slow to get to things. Maybe your dad is like you. He's slow to get to things. Then you can have a softness about his behavior because he's just like you. Takes a little time.
Or the other way around, but yeah.
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 I think then, I think it's just a little bit, whoever is soft and not quite there yet, like, he's just like them, and that's okay.
Mhm.
One other thought I have just about sort of our aging parents and in-laws is we have a culture of talking about how hard it is. And I'm not saying that it's not hard, but that doesn't make any of us feel better, right? And
Mhm.
so how can we tell stories that feel better to ourselves and better to them and better, like, culturally? Thinking back, in other cultures, this isn't an issue because everyone just kind of lives together and takes care of each other. And so if we could just soften our stories about it, we would all approach it with this different energy that would feel so amazing.
And when you say soften the story and tell a story differently, you mean in terms of telling it to ourselves, how
Yeah.
we play the story, how
Well,
we
I would
describe it to
say,
people. What do you mean by that?
I would, first of all, to yourself, and it has to be a true story. So you can't make up a story, this is fabulous and I'm loving every minute of it. But when we start to talk about how hard it is, and it's, we will say something, I'm really struggling figuring out what to do with my dad, and my siblings and I can't agree, and it's taking up all this time. Like, that's where we put our attention, is our experience. And so if you said, um, this is going to have to be a neutral story, but like, my siblings and I are figuring out the best thing to do with my dad this year. And so it works out best for him and we honor him, or something like that, that would feel totally different to you
Mhm.
and to him, to the whole scenario, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So that's what I mean about a story. And I actually think if you can tell other people a similar story, and usually those stories are very short and simple, not long and drawn out. We tend to have long and drawn out stories about all of these things. And so really simple, I'm working on, where my dad's going to live this year. Then all of a sudden there's no energy. Like, as physicians, we tend to delve into the negative and the drama and the stories and the decisions. And that's just very expensive for you and for everybody listening.
Yeah.
Right? You can gift me, not me in particular, but say I was your colleague, the story of just saying, yeah, we're just figuring out where my 90-year-old dad's going to live. Then nobody's like, then we're all like, oh, that's so nice. I'm so glad you have a 90-year-old dad. And we don't get into the drama of the fall risks and other things. So that kind of thing. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
It does. Mhm.
Beautiful.
Okay, thank
Well,
you.
that was super helpful, I think, because it helps people understand kind of how to use the tools.
Mhm.
So let's end there. I'm happy to answer any other questions if anybody has questions. Mary and I are doing this, I think it's going to be a 6-week sort of coaching like this that lasts a little bit longer each time. She's going to bring in the caregiving geriatric stuff, and I'm going to do the coaching. That's going to start a week and a half from now. We're also doing a retreat next spring where we're going to do the same thing, but in person, where you get to practice the mindfulness and weave in the other stuff. A lot of which I didn't talk about tonight, but if you watch last week's recording, you'll get to hear a little bit more about how mindfulness impacts your nervous system and your sort of reactivity and the way you respond to all this. That makes it so much easier. So we will be doing that if anyone has interest. And I will also say this is something I do a lot of one-on-one coaching on, because sort of an acute moment. And I think if you can figure out how to use these tools we all learn them in different settings. So I started more with relationships and work, and then it seeps over into parenting. Some people come for parenting, so you just figure out where you are, and these tools can be super helpful with all the other things in your life too. So I like to just throw that out, and I'm happy to answer any more questions for any of you. Nice to see you all and or your boxes. I hope you are enjoying your Sunday evening, and I will see all of you soon.